These stories are not easy for me to tell, even at my age that I am now, and I try to relive these moments. I feel that it's important to not only share my experiences, but it's also therapy for myself as well. I was raised by my grandmother. She was a well-known witch, voodoo doctor, hoodoo worker, whatever you want to call it, but it was a part of my life growing up. People would come see her from all walks of life. Doctors, lawyers, housewives, businessmen, gangsters, drug dealers, as foolish as that sounds, yes, drug dealers, but she would protect their shipments. But it was my life growing up. In her eyes, she did work to help everybody, and she was constantly fighting evil in the dark side, and while doing so, she realized she had to know both. Well, many times growing up, there's a lot of stories that stands out, and this is one that still haunts me today. Growing up in our house in Montgomery, Alabama, it was a simple 3-bedroom house, no central air, window units. It was a lower middle class neighborhood. And one afternoon, a family moves in across the street. It was a little abnormal because it was a class from the upper echelon. It was a full-blown colonel, his wife, and their son, who was around 12 to 13 years old. It did not take long for me to realize they moved into our neighborhood and moved into that house for a specific reason. And that reason was that my grandmother was tending to their son for some ailment that was going on. I did not know the reason why. I just knew and I could feel that there was something dark and sinister about that house and about that boy. As soon as he arrived, things started to happen. I remember, like it was yesterday, that my dog Shag outside constantly barked and growled toward that house. We'd have to bring him in at night. He would not stop barking. I started having even more horrific nightmares of seeing somebody or something in our house. I could hear him moving about and walking constantly, but it was definitely at that moment just in my dreams. As the months went on and my grandmother would make her daily visits over there, I started hearing her talk about it to my mother when she made her afternoon visits, and to her friends and certain clients that would come in. The way I understood it, it was a very nice house, full of immaculate antiques, but the boy's bedroom was unlike anything you can imagine. There was no bed in that room, no lights, nothing he could hurt himself with. The room was just covered with mattresses on the floor and the wall. And the reason there was mattresses on the floor and the wall was because the boy had the uncanny ability during his fits that he could crawl the wall like a bug and a rodent, and even the ceiling. She best described that this boy was possessed unlike anything she's ever seen before in her entire life. She said this boy possessed something so evil that she had to try to learn from it, because she never knew such evil could exist within something so young and pure. As the years went on, the work continued. Things changed. The boy started, I would say, getting better because they would allow him outside, but he would not play. He would just stand there and stare directly at our house. And I remember when I was in the front yard playing, I could not only see him staring at me, I could feel him staring through my soul. He was purely evil, and I was terrified of him. As time began to grow, the work began to my grandmother, and what I've learned over the years is when you would do work, you mentally and spiritually connect to things and entities and people, and they connect to you. And the boy would start having the ability to project himself into our house. I could see him at times and I could scream. I can even hear his footsteps as he would run and walk across our hardwood floors, which we had no carpets. And I could hear my grandmother scream, "Get out!" And she would recite this stuff and maybe blow this powder out and do these different prayers and spells to keep our house safe. But no matter what she could do, he would still find a way to enter our house. Not physically, but in a form at that time in my life I could not recognize. On the evening where it all pretty much met its match was a night unlike any other, but it was different because my mother came to stay with me, and my grandmother went to the house. And my grandmother's sister, who came up from South Alabama, went with her to the home. It was strange to the fact that I could feel the tenseness, I could feel the fear, and it was raining and thundering and lightning. And as so cliche and as it sounds I've made up, This is exactly to the recollection of how it occurred in my mind. I remember I couldn't sleep in my room, so I felt the safest place in the house was in my grandmother's room, so I laid in bed. My mother sat in a rocking chair and rocked, but I couldn't sleep. I remember hearing her rock, and I would look. It would be 8 o'clock. It'd be 9 o'clock. 10 o'clock. Nothing. It thundered. It lightened. It rained. It poured. And I remember from the point that my grandmother entered the house, I never saw her sister at any point after that, so I don't know if she left or what. My grandmother came in. My grandmother sat down in the chair. She asked my mother to pour her a drink, and my mother poured her a shot glass of Jack Daniels, and she chugged it down. My grandmother looked at us and said what she encountered tonight and what she seen is something that she would never, ever, ever forget. And I remember over the years, my grandmother, who was Dutch and Creek, she was at times cruel, always forceful, but I saw something in her that I'd never seen before at any point in my life. I saw her being human. Whatever she saw, encountered, took away some of her magic and made her like you and I. The next morning, the family was gone. Over the years, that house stayed vacant. Nobody lived there, but it was well kept. And as I went to school and I grew up in junior high, high school, college, got married, went on with my life, and that house stayed well taken care of, but it stayed vacant at the time. Well, right before the years for my grandmother's passed, somebody moved into the house. It was an older gentleman, probably in his 50s. It's the way he looked to me. But I did not know anything about him. He never talked to anybody, but my grandmother knew exactly who he was. And at the same time, when I'd go pay visits to my grandmother, that man would stand in that yard and stare across, and I knew exactly who it was. It was that boy that I remember that's now a man, and that evil inside of him still existed today. And whether he had anything to do with the death of my grandmother, or he came back to that part of the full circle, I do know that began a cycle in my life and a part of my world where I know there's something truly evil out there exists, and the battle for not only the physical world and the spiritual world exists every day.